The dusty crossroads of Oakhaven smelled perpetually of roasted pecans, burnt sugar, and the faint, bitter tang of ash from the eastern wastes. 16-year-old Clara adjusted the threadbare shawl over her narrow shoulders, her fingers stained pale brown from a long morning of boiling blackberries. Beside her stood a crude wooden table laden with half a dozen fresh pies, their crusts crimped with meticulous, practiced precision. To the passing merchants, farmers, and traveling mercenaries, she was merely the orphaned Omega selling pies by the side of the king's highway, a quiet, harmless girl who kept her eyes cast downward, speaking only when spoken to, and never daring to display an ounce of pride. Yet behind those lowered eyelids rested a pair of striking, iridescent violet eyes so rare and luminous that Clara spent her entire life trying to hide them beneath a grime-streaked hood. She was a nameless scullery stray taken in by the local baker, Old Man Miller, who treated her with a cold, transactional tolerance. Clara knew nothing of her true lineage, only that her unique lavender gaze was a dangerous curse in a world ruled by territorial alpha lords who viewed rogue or unclaimed Omegas as little more than livestock or bargaining chips. The summer sun hung low over the canopy of the whispering pines, casting long, bruised shadows across the dirt road. The air was thick with the threat of a late afternoon thunderstorm, but it was not the rumbling clouds in the distance that made Clara's pulse stutter in her throat. It was the low, rhythmic thudding of heavy ironclad hooves echoing down the Imperial Highway. A war band was approaching from the north, moving with a disciplined, suffocating power that made the birds go entirely silent in the tree line. The banners fluttering above the dust cloud bore the emblem of a silver direwolf coiled around a shattered crown, the royal sigil of King Valerius Vance, the formidable, ruthless alpha monarch of the northern Pax. Stories of King Valerius were whispered like ghost stories around hearthfires. A warrior king who had united 7 warring territories through sheer military violence, a man whose brutal strength was tempered only by a legendary, aching grief. 10 years ago, during the Great Purge of the Crimson Pack, his young, fated mate and infant child had vanished into the chaos, presumed slaughtered. Since that bloody night, King Valerius had ruled with an iron fist, cold, unyielding, and forever searching the faces of every traveler in the realm for a ghost he could never recover. Clara pulled her patched cloak tighter around her chest, attempting to shrink into the rough pine bark of the ancient oak tree behind her stall. She knew better than to make eye contact with Imperial soldiers. In the hierarchical world of shapeshifters and pack dynasties, an unbonded female Omega without a male protector was an invitation for trouble. As the thundering hooves drew closer, the small crowd of local villagers quickly scattered into the brush or hurried toward the safety of their wooden shanties. Only Clara remained trapped behind her makeshift display table, her knees trembling beneath her coarse wool skirt. The royal vanguard arrived in a wave of dark leather, gleaming steel, and the heavy, intoxicating scent of ozone, winter pine, and dominant alpha pheromones that pressed against the chest like a lead weight. At the center of the armada rode a massive stallion, black as obsidian, carrying a man whose very presence demanded submission. King Valerius was a towering figure carved from hardened muscle and bitter experience. Silver dusted his dark temples, though he was in the absolute prime of his physical power. His jaw was framed by a sharp, trimmed beard, and his broad chest was encased in master-crafted obsidian plate armor decorated with gold inlay. A heavy velvet cloak, lined with winter fox fur, swept over his massive shoulders. His features were harsh, etched with lines of unrelenting duty and an unspoken, perpetual tragedy. Beside him rode his chief lieutenant, a lean, scarred alpha named Eric, whose watchful eyes scanned the perimeter with practiced paranoia. As the royal cortege reached the intersection, Valerius reined in his warhorse, intending only to allow the animals to drink from the nearby creek before pressing on toward the capital. "We rest the beasts for 10 minutes, Eric," Valerius commanded, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the air, causing the leaves on the trees to shiver. "The storm will hit before nightfall, and I will not break a horse's leg in the dark." "Understood, Your Majesty," Eric replied, dismounting instantly. "I'll have the guards set a perimeter." Valerius swung his long legs over his saddle and stepped down onto the dusty earth with an effortless, lethal grace. His sharp amber eyes swept the quiet roadside, instantly catching sight of the lone, trembling girl standing beside the wooden cart. He paid little attention to the pastry rows, accustomed to villagers hawking their wares along the trade routes. However, as the wind shifted suddenly, swirling down from the northern ridges, it carried a stray scent directly toward the king, a scent that cut through the dust, the leather, and the heavy aroma of baking spices. It was a delicate, impossibly pure fragrance of sweet jasmine, morning dew, and fresh rain. Valerius froze in his tracks. His broad chest expanded as he inhaled deeply, his golden eyes widening in sudden, violent shock. It was a scent he had not smelled in an entire decade. A scent he thought had been permanently erased from the earth in the ashes of his burning fortress. "My king?" Eric asked, noticing the sudden rigidity in his commander's spine and placing a hand on his hilt. "Is there a threat?" Valerius ignored his lieutenant entirely. Driven by a primal, irresistible pull that roared to life within his chest, the Alpha King took slow, deliberate steps toward the small pie stand. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped sparrow. She lowered her head even further, her chin practically touching her collarbone, praying that the intimidating monarch would simply buy a blackberry tart and leave her in peace. "Look at me, girl," Valerius ordered softly, though the authority in his tone was absolute, leaving no room for refusal in the soul of any Omega. Clara swallowed hard, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to resist, but the natural instinct of her nature forced her to slowly raise her head. As she tilted her face upward, her heavy canvas hood slipped back just an inch, allowing the filtered sunlight to catch her features. For the first time, her face was fully exposed to the King of the North. Valerius stopped 2 paces away. His breath hitched in his throat as his eyes locked onto hers. There, framed by smudge marks and pale, messy brown hair, were 2 wide, unmistakable, luminous violet eyes. Eyes that shimmered like polished amethysts under the afternoon light. They were identical to the eyes of his lost queen, a genetic trait found nowhere else in the known territories except within the royal bloodline of the extinct Moonstone lineage. But it wasn't just the color. It was the exact distinct flare of silver around the pupils, a mark of the high-born Omegas of the ancestral realm. The air grew deathly still. The soldiers surrounding them went rigid as they felt the sudden, explosive spike in their king's aura. Valerius stepped closer, his large, calloused hand reaching out with surprising, agonizing tenderness toward her face. Clara flinched, pulling back slightly, her hands clutching the edge of her table so hard her knuckles turned white. "Your eyes," Valerius whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion none of his men had heard in 10 long years. "Who was your mother, child?" I don't know, my lord," Clara stuttered, her voice barely a whisper against the rustling of the wind. "I am an orphan. I have no name other than Clara. I've worked for the baker since I was small." Valerius reached out and gently touched a strand of her hair, his thumb brushing against her cheekbone, wiping away a smear of soot. The touch sent an electric shock through both of their veins, an undeniable, soul-binding resonance that made Clara gasp. Valerius looked at her with a mix of awe, agony, and possessive, fierce fury. The girl standing before him was not just a random orphan selling baked goods on a dirt road. She possessed the exact eyes, the undeniable scent, and the unbreakable spirit of his long-lost bloodline. "Sire?" Eric stepped forward cautiously, his hand still resting on his sword blade. "What is the meaning of this? She is just a street vendor." Valerius did not look away from Clara's terrified lavender gaze. "She is no vendor, Eric," the king declared, his voice echoing across the silent glade with undeniable finality. She bears the soul mark of the Moonstone lineage. Look at her eyes. She is the living mirror of my fallen mate, or the daughter I thought died in my arms." Before Clara could comprehend the weight of his words, the brush behind her cart exploded into motion. 4 masked men dressed in black leather, bearing the jagged mark of the Rogue Syndicate, burst out from the shadow of the trees, their daggers drawn and aimed directly at the king's exposed neck. Was this a chance encounter? Or had Clara been used as unwitting bait in an ambush planned for the sovereign? The steel blades of the ambushers caught the dying light of the afternoon sun, reflecting cold silver against the dense foliage of the whispering pines. Before the masked assassins could close the distance to the king, Valerius moved with a terrifying, predatory speed that belied his massive frame. With a single fluid motion, he drew his broadsword from its scabbard. The heavy steel whistled through the air, parrying the lead assassin's strike with a resonant clang that shook the dust from the surrounding branches. "Protect the girl," Valerius bellowed, his voice transforming into an echoing alpha command that reverberated in the bone marrow of every soldier present. Eric and 3 royal guards instantly formed a tight ring around Clara's flimsy wooden table, their shields locked and swords drawn. Clara dropped to her knees behind the cart, her heart battering frantically against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pressed her hands over her ears as the clearing erupted into chaos. The sharp clash of steel, the guttural snarls of shifting warriors, and the heavy thuds of bodies hitting the dirt. To a small, sheltered Omega, who had spent her entire existence worrying about burnt pie crusts and winter frostbite, the sudden violence was utterly terrifying. Within seconds, the battle was over. The Rogue Syndicate attackers were no match for the elite Royal Guard, let alone the raw, merciless power of King Valerius himself. The monarch stood amidst the fallen assailants, his blade dripping dark crimson onto the dusty road. He wasn't even winded. His chest heaved slowly as he wiped his blade clean on the sleeve of a slain attacker, his golden eyes burning with an intense, unyielding fire as he turned his gaze back to Clara. The king stepped over the debris of the shattered pie stand and knelt down in the dirt directly in front of the trembling girl. The terrifying bloodlust that had filled his eyes moments ago evaporated, replaced by a profound, trembling gentleness that seemed entirely alien on the face of the fearsome Alpha King. "Are you harmed, child?" Valerius asked softly, extending a large leather-gloved hand toward her. Clara shrank back slightly, her knees pressed against her chest, her wide purple eyes fixed on the bloodstains on his armor. I am unhurt, Your Majesty. Please. I have done nothing wrong. I am just Clara. I only sell pies for Master Miller." "Look at me, Clara," Valerius requested gently, removing his heavy gauntlet to reveal a hand covered in old battle scars. He reached out, his warm, bare fingers lightly touching her chin to tilt her face toward his. "Do not fear me. On my honor as the Alpha of the Northern Packs, no harm will ever come to you again." As his warm skin touched hers, a sudden powerful spark ran through Clara's veins, a sensation of overwhelming warmth, safety, and an inexplicably ancient familiarity. It was an instinctual pull that defied all logic, calming the panic in her chest, despite the blood spilled only feet away. Eric stepped closer, his sword still drawn, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods for further threats before looking down at Clara with deep skepticism. "Sire, we must clear the area. The Syndicate knows our route. Furthermore, this girl, she could be an accomplice. It is too convenient that an ambush occurred precisely where she set her stall." "Silence, Eric," Valerius snapped, his tone cold and sharp. "Look at her eyes. Look at her scent. The Syndicate uses dirt and steel. They cannot fabricate the bloodline of the Royal Moonstone. She is the exact image of Queen Lyra." Valerius stood up, offering his hand to Clara. 10 years ago, my pack was betrayed from within during the Eclipse Siege. My mate, Lyra, fled into the forest with our infant daughter, while I fought to hold the gates. When I finally cut my way through the enemy lines, I found only Lyra's lifeless body near the riverbank. Our child was gone, swept away by the current or taken by the wild wolves. I searched for years until every noble in the realm claimed she was dead. Clara stared at him, her lips parted in disbelief. She had heard tales of the Great Purge, of course. But to a nameless orphan raised in a drafty attic, those stories belonged to gods and legends, not real life. My lord, that is impossible. Master Miller found me floating in a woven basket near the riverbank down at the lower valley when I was a toddler. He took me in to work off the debt of my keeping. I have no memory of a mother or a father. I am nobody. You are not nobody, Valerius insisted softly, his eyes glimmering with a mixture of grief and sudden, fierce hope. You carry the royal scent of wild jasmine and the violet gaze that has belonged exclusively to the women of the Moonstone line for 500 years. Nature itself does not lie, little one. To confirm his suspicion beyond any doubt, Valerius reached into his tunic and pulled out a heavy medallion suspended from a thick gold chain. The artifact was crafted from polished starlight silver, holding a massive, uncut violet gemstone at its center. Clara gasped as the stone suddenly began to glow with a soft, pulsing amethyst light the second it came within a few inches of her chest. In the lore of the Alpha-Omega Pacts, the Moonstone pendant was an ancient relic forged with ancestral magic. It only resonated in the presence of direct, royal female heirs of the founding lineage. An unbonded or lower-ranking Omega could touch it 1,000 times without provoking a single spark. But in Clara's presence, the jewel sang with bright, luminous life. The ancestral stone recognizes you, Valerius said, his voice thick with emotion. You are my daughter, Clara, Princess of the Northern Pax. Clara's mind raced, overwhelmed by the impossible truth unfolding before her. Just an hour ago, her greatest worry was whether she would have enough copper coins to satisfy Master Miller's greedy expectations tonight. Now, a king was kneeling in the dirt, calling her a princess, and claiming she was the daughter he had mourned for a decade. Before she could process the weight of the revelation, the sound of heavy wagon wheels and angry yelling sounded from down the bend. Master Miller, a round, unpleasant man with a permanent scowl and grease-stained apron, came marching down the road holding a thick wooden switch. Clara, you lazy girl, what is all this racket? Miller bellowed, unaware of the royal banners hidden by the tree line. You've been out here for hours and I hear swords clashing. If you've ruined my pies, I'll strap your back until... Miller froze mid-sentence as he rounded the thick oak tree and took in the scene. A dozen fully armored royal guards stood in formation. 4 corpses lay bleeding on the grass, and King Valerius Vance himself stood tall, radiating an imposing, suffocating alpha pressure that instantly brought the baker to his knees in the mud. Your Majesty! Miller stammered, dropping his wooden switch, his face turning pale white. I did not know. Please forgive my insolence. Valerius turned his gaze to the groveling baker, his eyes narrowing dangerously. You are the one who took in this girl 10 years ago? Yes, sire, Miller babbled, trembling uncontrollably under the monarch's gaze. I saved her from the river. I fed her, clothed her, gave her work. And you treated her like a servant, threatening her with violence, Valerius interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. He stepped toward the baker, his shadow completely engulfing the man. Did you know who she was when you pulled her from the water? Miller swallowed hard, sweating profusely. No, sire. She was just a baby in a basket. She had a fancy silver ring wrapped in her swaddling clothes, but I sold it to pay for her food over the years. Valerius's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. The silver ring Miller described was the crest ring of the royal nursery. The baker had known all along that the child was of high birth. Yet he had concealed her identity for 10 years, exploiting her labor and hiding her away in obscurity to avoid drawing the wrath or attention of the royal court. You kept a princess of the realm in rags and forced her to work your fields, Valerius said, his aura flaring with suppressive force. "By rights, I should execute you where you kneel for high treason against the crown." Clara stepped forward instinctively, placing her small hand on Valerius's arm. "Wait. Please, my lord. Do not kill him." Valerius paused, looking down at the young girl. "He mistreated you, Clara. He hid you from your home." "He was cruel and greedy, yes," Clara admitted, her voice growing steady as she looked at her old master. "But if he had not pulled that basket from the river, I would have drowned or starved 10 years ago. Let him live. Leave him with his bakery and his shame." Valerius searched her violet eyes, amazed by the grace and mercy residing within a girl who had known so little kindness in her life. He nodded slowly, yielding to her request, a gesture that shocked Eric and the surrounding guards, for the king rarely showed mercy to anyone who crossed his path. "Very well," Valerius commanded, turning back to Miller. "Your life is spared by the grace of the princess, but your shop and lands are hereby confiscated by the crown, and you are banished from Oakhaven forever. If you set foot in the northern provinces again, your head will be placed on a pike." Miller scrambled backward in terror, stammering his thanks before turning and running down the road as fast as his legs could carry him. Valerius turned back to Clara, removing his velvet cloak and gently placing it around her shoulders. The fabric was heavy, warm, and rich, instantly enveloping her in his protective, comforting alpha scent. "Come, my daughter," Valerius said gently. "It is time to return home to the Sunspire Citadel. There is much you must learn, and many secrets about your mother's past that must finally be brought to light." Clara looked back at her small wooden pie stand, now smashed to splinters on the dirt road, and then up at the majestic warrior king holding out his hand to her. Her life as a quiet, forgotten street vendor was over in an instant. But as she took his hand and allowed him to lift her onto his great war horse, a deep, unsettling feeling settled in her stomach. As the war party turned north and rode into the shadow of the mountains, Clara did not notice a hooded figure standing silently high in the boughs of an ancient pine tree, watching their departure. The stranger pulled back his hood to reveal cold, slitted yellow eyes and a dark tattoo on his neck, the mark of Lord Lucius, the king's own stepbrother and the commander of the royal vanguard. The ambush on the road had not been a random attack by rogues. It had been orchestrated to verify if the rumors of a violet-eyed girl in Oakhaven were true. And now that the lost princess had been found, the conspirators within the Sunspire Citadel would have to accelerate their plans to ensure she never claimed her mother's throne. But what secret did Clara carry in her blood that made her far more dangerous to Lord Lucius than just a simple heir to the crown? The journey toward the Sunspire Citadel took 3 days through the jagged cliffs of the Frostfang Mountains. With every league they traveled north, the world changed dramatically around Clara. Gone were the dusty crossroad villages and humble timber huts. In their place rose majestic stone fortresses built directly into the mountain faces, draped in silver banners that snapped fiercely against the alpine wind. For the first time in her life, Clara ate warm meals cooked with exotic spices, slept wrapped in thick wolf furs, and rode at the head of a mighty royal vanguard. Yet, despite the luxuries, a deep anxiety churned in her chest. King Valerius was attentive and fiercely protective, spending long hours near the campfire explaining the complex customs of the northern pacts. He spoke of ancient bloodlines, of duty, and of her mother, Queen Lyra, describing her as a woman of unparalleled bravery who had mastered the art of ancient moon cants, lost vocal incantations that could heal or dominate the spiritual bonds of shapeshifters. "You carry her blood, Clara," Valerius told her quietly on the second night, staring into the flickering embers of the camp. "And in our world, high-born blood is both a shield and a target. My court is not a place of peace. It is a den of wolves, each hungrier than the last." His warning proved true the moment they passed through the towering wrought iron gates of the Sunspire Citadel. The keep was a breathtaking marvel of white granite and obsidian, sitting atop a jagged peak that overlooked the shimmering valley below. But the atmosphere within its grand halls was thick with unspoken tension, political maneuvering, and stifling intrigue. Nobles dressed in rich velvet and mink lined the cobblestone courtyard, their whispers rustling like dry leaves as Valerius brought his warhorse to a halt. Standing at the base of the grand marble staircase was a tall, sharp-featured alpha with silvering dark hair and cold, calculating amber eyes. He wore a tunic embroidered with the crest of the vanguard. Lord Lucius, the king's stepbrother and high commander of the royal armies. Beside him stood a strikingly beautiful young female Omega named Lady Selene, dressed in shimmering silver silk, her expression an icy mask of strained composure. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," Lucius said, bowing with exaggerated deference. His eyes flicked past Valerius and locked onto Clara, a flash of dark, unreadable contempt passing over his features, before he smoothed it over with a practiced smile. "The court was alarmed when we heard of your sudden detour toward Oakhaven." "I went to reclaim what was lost, Lucius," Valerius replied, his voice resounding through the silent courtyard. He reached up and helped Clara dismount, placing a solid protective arm around her shoulders. "Members of the court, hear me. This is my daughter, Clara, Princess of the Sunspire, heir to the Moonstone lineage. Let it be known that any insult to her is an insult to the crown itself." A collective gasp echoed across the crowd of nobles. Whispers erupted instantly. Lady Selene's hands clenched into tight fists within the folds of her dress. For 3 years, Selene, the daughter of a powerful duke, had been poised to marry Valerius and secure her family's claim to the throne. The sudden arrival of a long-lost daughter and legitimate heir completely destroyed the political dynamic of the court. "A princess?" Lucius chuckled smoothly, though his eyes remained as cold as ice. "A marvelous tale, brother. But surely you realize the court will require absolute proof. A girl raised in the gutter by a baker, brought forth after 10 years. Rumors of lost heirs are common, and treasonous impostors are not unheard of." "She carries the violet eyes, Lucius," Valerius said coldly, his aura flaring in a subtle threat, and the moonstone pendant resonated in her presence. "A beautiful relic, to be sure," Lucius countered smoothly, stepping closer. "Yet, as High Commander, it is my sworn duty to protect the integrity of the throne. By ancient pack law, any unclaimed heir returning after a decade must undergo the trial of the ancestral altar before the Council of Elders during the full moon. Only when the Holy Fire accepts her scent can she be officially recognized in the royal ledger." Valerius's jaw tightened. The trial is dangerous for an unbonded Omega who has not been trained in pack magic. "It is the law, Your Majesty," Lucius said with a sharp, victorious smile. "Unless, of course, you doubt her true origins?" Clara felt the heavy gazes of 100 nobles pressing against her. She looked up at Valerius, seeing the rare trace of concern in his rugged face. She knew that if she backed down now, Valerius's authority would be undermined, and she would remain a suspicious outsider in her own home. "I will take the trial," Clara said, her voice clear and surprisingly firm, stepping out from beneath her father's arm. "I have nothing to hide." Lucius bowed low, his smile widening slightly. "A courageous response, little one. The full moon is in 3 nights. Until then, enjoy the hospitality of your father's castle." Over the next 2 days, Clara was swept into a whirlwind of courtly preparation. She was given lavish chambers lined with tapestries, dressed in fine silk gowns, and attended by silent servants. Yet she felt more isolated than ever. Only Valerius offered her genuine warmth, spending every spare moment teaching her the history of their ancestors and showing her the hidden passages of the ancient fortress. On the evening before the full moon, Clara walked alone through the castle's sanctuary gardens, seeking refuge from the oppressive atmosphere of the keep. The crisp mountain air carried the scent of night-blooming orchids and damp stone. As she rounded a marble archway, she overheard hushed voices coming from a shadowed gazebo. "She cannot be allowed to survive the trial, Lucius," a bitter female voice hissed. It was Lady Selene. "If she is recognized by the council, my father's alliance with you falls apart. I was meant to be queen." "Control yourself, Selene," Lucius's cold baritone replied. "The girl will not survive tomorrow night. The trial of the ancestral altar requires the heir to touch the sacred braziers. I have already instructed the alchemists to coat the ritual stones with the sap of the nightshade root. The moment her bare skin touches the stone, the toxin will induce cardiac arrest within minutes. To the council, it will appear as though the ancestral fire rejected a fraudulent peasant." Clara gasped, backing away in terror, her foot catching against a loose cobblestone. The sound cracked like a whip through the quiet garden. "Who's there?" Lucius's voice barked instantly. Clara turned and ran as fast as her long silk gown permitted, her heart hammering against her ribs. She ducked behind a high hedge, just as Lucius and 2 heavy guards stepped into the courtyard paths, their boots clicking loudly against the stone. She held her breath, pressing her back against the cold granite wall, her hand clutched over her mouth. "Check the outer perimeter," Lucius commanded his guards. "If anyone was listening, slit their throat." Clara waited in horrified silence until the heavy footsteps faded into the distance. Shaking uncontrollably, she realized the terrible depth of the conspiracy. Lucius didn't just want to stop her from becoming princess. He had orchestrated the entire plot from the beginning. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Clara navigated the memory of a map her father had shown her and slipped into the deepest subterranean archives beneath the keep, a place forgotten by the daily court. She needed to know why Lucius was so terrified of her existence beyond mere political rank. In the dusty depths of the royal vault, lit only by a single tallow candle, Clara searched through dusty leather-bound chronicles of the Crimson Pack War. She pulled down a heavy ledger stamped with her mother's personal seal, Queen Lyra's private journals. As she flipped through the yellowed parchment, her eyes caught a passage written in her mother's elegant, precise handwriting. The entry was dated the exact night of the bloody siege 10 years ago. "If my daughter survives this dark night, she must never know the full burden of her blood until she is ready. The Moonstone lineage does not merely carry royal rank. We are the sole keepers of the ancient sovereign oath. Our blood possesses the rare hereditary immunity to the Alpha command, and our vocal resonance can dismantle an Alpha's pack dominance entirely." Lucius discovered this secret. He does not fear a girl on the throne. He fears that if Valerius learns the truth, Lucius will lose his mind control over the northern vanguard troops, whom he has quietly bound to his own blood using forbidden shadow binds. Clara let out a choked gasp as the major plot twist crystallized in her mind. Lucius hadn't just betrayed the pack 10 years ago out of simple ambition. He was using illegal dark alpha magic, the forbidden shadow bind, to secretly control the minds of the king's highest generals, slowly poisoning Valerius's reign from within. And as a true female heir of the Moonstone line, Clara possessed the natural dormant genetic power to completely shatter his hypnotic hold over the army with her voice. Before Clara could close the journal, a shadow fell over the ancient book. A fascinating read, isn't it? A smooth, terrifying voice echoed from the darkness of the archway. Clara whipped her head around. Standing in the doorway of the vault was Lord Lucius, holding a drawn steel blade, his yellow eyes glowing with predatory malice in the dim candlelight. Behind him stood 2 guards whose eyes were strangely milky and dull, completely under the influence of his dark shadow bind. "You should have stayed selling pies on the highway, little girl," Lucius sneered, stepping slowly into the vault. "You have your mother's curiosity, and now you will share her tragic fate." He raised his blade and signaled his hypnotized guards to strike. How could an untrained, unbonded Omega escape 3 armed warriors in the subterranean depths of the castle? The cold steel of Lord Lucius's blade gleamed under the flickering candlelight of the subterranean vault. Clara backed away until her spine hit the stone shelves, her fingers clutching Queen Lyra's dusty ledger against her chest. The two shadow-bound guards advanced like mindless marionettes, their vacant, milky eyes reflecting no emotion, no soul, only the absolute, artificial command of their master. "Did you really think an untrained girl could outsmart me?" Lucius taunted, stepping over the threshold with a chilling, triumphant laugh. "Your mother thought she could use her rare moonstone blood to break my hold over the vanguard, too. She died pleading for her child's life in the mud, and tomorrow, the court will believe you died of a weak heart during the ancestral trial. My father will know it was you." Clara spat, her voice shaking with adrenaline, though her mind raced for an escape. "Valerius is blind," Lucius snapped, his face contorting into a mask of bitter hatred. "He has spent 10 years drowning in grief while I built an army within his own walls. Once you are removed, I will challenge him for the throne. The vanguard belongs to me." As Lucius raised his hand to signal his men to strike, Clara remembered the ancient passage in her mother's journal. "Our blood possesses the rare hereditary immunity to the Alpha Command, and our vocal resonance can dismantle an Alpha's pack dominance entirely." She had no weapon, no physical strength, and no combat training. All she had was her voice, the voice of the extinct Moonstone line. Lucius issued a sharp, guttural Alpha command, "Kill her!" The order hit the air like a physical shockwave, a heavy, hypnotic force meant to paralyze Clara's instincts and force his guards to execute her without hesitation. But the dark magic washed over Clara like water against granite. She felt no compulsion, no terror-induced paralysis. Instead, a surge of latent, ancestral power awoke deep within her chest, heating her veins until her very skin radiated a faint, shimmering violet light. Clara opened her mouth and let out a crystal-clear, resonant vocal tone. An ancient moonstone mooncant passed down through centuries of royal female omegas. The sound was not a scream. It was a pure, vibrating musical note that shattered the silence of the subterranean vault, echoing off the stone walls like a striking cathedral bell. The moment the frequency touched the two guards, the milky film over their eyes shattered. The black shadow-bind magic holding their minds was violently ripped away. The guards gasped, clutching their heads as their true consciousness returned, staring around the room in disoriented horror. "What? What is this?" One of the guards groaned, dropping his sword as his own free will flooded back. "Lord Lucius, what have you done to us?" "Useless fools!" Lucius roared, realized his dark spell had been permanently undone. Driven by desperate rage, he lunged forward himself, bringing his heavy broadsword down toward Clara's head. Clara ducked behind a massive wooden bookshelf, just as steel bit into ancient pine, sending splinters flying. She scrambled toward the vault's stone staircase, shouting at the top of her lungs with her newly discovered resonant voice. "Father, treason in the vault." Her voice carried through the stone passages, amplified by the natural acoustics of the keep and her ancestral power. Up in the main courtyard, King Valerius froze. The distinct crystalline resonance of a moonstone voice hit his ears, a sound he had not heard since Queen Lyra was alive. Before Lucius could catch Clara on the winding stairs, the heavy oak doors at the top of the subterranean vault were violently blown off their hinges. King Valerius burst through the shattered wood, broadsword drawn, his golden eyes blazing with a terrifying, unstoppable fury. Behind him stormed Eric, and a dozen royal soldiers who had heard the frantic magical alarm. "Lucius!" Valerius bellowed, his voice carrying the full, earth-shaking weight of a true Alpha King. Lucius skidded to a halt on the stairs, trapped between Clara above him and the guards he had lost control over below. Realizing he was cornered, the commander's composure shattered into desperate madness. He charged up the remaining steps, aiming his blade directly at Clara's heart in a final attempt to take the air down with him. "She dies first!" Lucius screamed. Valerius moved with a speed that defied human sight. He threw himself between Lucius and Clara, his heavy blade parrying Lucius's strike with an explosion of sparks. With a powerful, sweeping kick, Valerius smashed his boot into Lucius's chest, sending his treacherous stepbrother tumbling down the entire flight of stone stairs to crash heavily onto the cold floor of the vault. The guards instantly swarmed the fallen traitor, pinning his arms behind his back and stripping him of his weapons. Valerius immediately turned to Clara, placing his massive hands on her shoulders, his breathing heavy, his golden eyes filled with frantic worry. "Clara, are you hurt? Tell me." "I am whole, Father," Clara breathed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks as she collapsed into her father's protective embrace. She held up Queen Lyra's journal with trembling hands. "He tried to poison me before the trial. He used shadow magic to control the Vanguard. He killed my mother 10 years ago." Valerius looked from the journal to his stepbrother, who was being dragged to his feet by the newly liberated guards. The two soldiers knelt before the king, confessing everything. How Lucius had bound their minds, how he had orchestrated the ambush at the crossroads, and how he had arranged the poison for the ancestral altar. Valerius's face hardened into absolute ice as he looked down at the man he had called brother for decades. "You took my wife," Valerius said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. "You tried to take my daughter, and you corrupted the honor of my pack." "You are weak, Valerius," Lucius spat, blood dripping from his lip. "A king who mourns a dead female for 10 years is unfit to rule." "The law of the North is absolute, Lucius," Valerius declared coldly. "For high treason, murder, and dark magic against the royal house, your titles are stripped, your bloodline is attainted, and you will face the executioner's axe at dawn." As the guards dragged the screaming traitor away into the dark dungeons, the silence of the vault returned, heavy and profound. Valerius gently pulled Clara against his chest, resting his chin atop her soft hair, his broad shoulders trembling with a profound, decade-old relief that finally washed over his soul. 3 days later, under the brilliant blue sky of the northern provinces, the grand courtyard of the Sunspire Citadel was filled with thousands of pack members, nobles, and soldiers. The tension of the past years was gone, replaced by a sense of historic renewal. Clara stood atop the raised dais before the Council of Elders, dressed in a magnificent gown of starlight silver velvet, her long hair braided with wild white roses and silver threads. Around her neck hung the moonstone pendant, pulsing with a steady, warm, and brilliant violet radiance that lit up her face. Lady Selene and the conspirators had been banished from the court, while the people of the kingdom celebrated the return of their true bloodline. King Valerius stepped forward, holding a magnificent crown crafted from polished silver branches and set with amethyst stones. He placed it gently upon Clara's head, bowing his knee before his daughter in front of the entire assembly. "People of the northern packs," Valerius shouted, his voice echoing across the mountains with pride and joy. "Behold your princess, Clara Vance of the Moonstone lineage, she who survived the dark, she who brought the truth into the light, and she who has restored the heart of our kingdom." A thunderous cheer erupted from the crowd, weapons raised in salute, banners waving wildly against the mountain breeze. Clara looked out over the sea of faces, warriors, noble families, and humble servants alike. She remembered the dusty crossroad in Oakhaven, the smell of burnt sugar, the heavy coarse wool of her old rags, and the lonely years spent believing she was a nameless, unloved stray, destined for nothing. She had been the orphaned Omega selling pies by the side of the road, hidden from the world, until an Alpha King looked beyond her soot-stained rags and recognized the sacred eyes of his missing bloodline. She placed her hand over the glowing moonstone pendant, feeling its warm, ancient heartbeat pulsing against her chest in perfect rhythm with her own. Is home merely the place where we are born, Or is it the destiny we find when we finally dare to raise our eyes to the light? Enjoyed the story of Clara and King Valerius? Click like, leave a comment with your favorite plot twist, and share this story with fellow werewolf fiction lovers to unlock the next chapter of the Northern Pack series.